Something has happened here in the middle of April 2020 that has never happened before, and that is the price of a barrel of crude oil has dropped below zero. What that means is that oil producers today are actually willing to pay someone to take their oil. And as crazy as that sounds, it's not that hard to imagine when you consider that most people are sheltering in place and working from home, and our entire lives have been pretty disrupted of late. But the bigger question is, what does this mean going forward? Sure, the month of May is going to be problematic, but how does oil recover going forward? And that's what we're talking about today. A futures contract is a promise to buy a commodity at a certain point in time. There's a whole industry of speculators who buy and sell these contracts trying to make small, short-term profits to get the prices to where they ought to be. But only the people holding the contract at the time of closing are liable to take delivery. So currently, near the end of the term for the May deliveries of crude oil, prices are below zero. That sounds crazy, and it kind of is. This is unprecedented. In the last 70 years, this has never happened. If you're old enough to remember what happened during the oil embargoes of the 1970s, you know that the price of gasoline shot through the roof. Prices for a barrel of crude oil jumped from the mid-20s to the 50s in a very small period of time, and there were people waiting at gas stations because they couldn't get any gasoline for their cars. What we're experiencing now is the exact opposite. Earlier this year, a lot of the OPEC countries, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, all decided to really increase their production. And this is because they kind of had an agreement in the past to control supply to better boost up prices and keep the economy more stable. But that pact has kind of ceased, and all these different countries are back at it, full force, full speed ahead with full rate oil production. As a result, our supply is huge, and no one could have seen this coming, that in March and April, we would all be sheltering in place, people would not be driving their cars, and as a result, the demand would fall out of the market. So now we have extra supply and almost no demand, and that has caused the futures market to completely crash for oil. So it is not an exaggeration to say that people are willing to pay you to take crude oil at this point. So you might be thinking, that sounds utterly absurd. Why would anybody pay somebody else to take their product off their hands? But in this case, oil, the crude oil market and business is incredibly complicated. You can imagine this pyramid of all these different pieces and players that have to play their role for the gasoline that you use to actually get there. First and foremost, a lot of the oil wells, whether onshore or offshore, can't easily be turned on and off or regulated. And in some cases, you just have to let them run, because if you try to shut down production on a well, you could potentially risk damaging the well, and future extraction efforts might not be possible. So as a result, what most people do is continue to extract the crude oil, and they are willing to pay to have it removed. That way they can continue to keep the well operational, because they figure in a month's time, things will go back to normal, demand will increase, and we'll be back in business. But here's the thing. The places we have to hold reserves of crude oil are filling up around the world. And as a result, there isn't that many places left where we can stockpile crude until the time when demand returns. And that's going to be a problem, because now we'll be selling futures in crude oil for June. And how will that look? It's hard to predict. But we might still be in this situation because the shelter-in-place orders for most places are going to be in effect until May 15th. At that point, we'll begin to go back to work, but you can imagine it's not going to just be night and day. There are going to be people who are apprehensive. Maybe they'll talk to their boss and work from home part-time. So it's really hard to predict how the demand is going to rise. Now, to get an idea of what happened here in the month of April and the end of March that has led to this unprecedented drop in crude oil demand, let's look at two factors. The first is airline travel. The second is the amount of driving that average people are doing. In the case of airline travel, here's a graph of the number of passengers coming in and out of airports in the United States for March through April of 2019 and 2020. You'll notice the numbers were pretty similar in the beginning of March, before a lot of this stuff really took effect. But quickly, as the news broke and the number of cases went up, things changed. By the end of March, the number of travelers in 2019 was 2.3 million, and in 2020, just 154,000. To put this into context, let's assume all flights happened on a Boeing 737. The 737 can go 76 miles per gallon per passenger. Factoring that some travel would be long-haul international, some will be short puddle jumps, let's assume the average trip was 2,500 miles. Based on the averages for the reduction in travelers in April of 2020, we see that there's about 70 million gallons less of aviation fuel burnt per day, which translates to 2.1 billion gallons for the entire month. Now, switching gears and talking about the automotive industry, gasoline consumption as a function of the number of travelers and traveling to work, we can do a similar calculation. If we assume the average driver drives 1,000 miles a month and the national average in the United States for the reduction in travel was 40%. Some states like New York and California had 48, 50%. Others had much lower, but the average was 40%. That means that there was a reduction of 3.2 billion gallons burnt in the automotive industry. 3.2 for the automotive, 2.1 billion for the aviation industry. So 5.3 billion gallons of gasoline were not burnt in the month of April, that they would have been the month before or this time last year or any other period. That is staggering, and that is why we're in the predicament that we're in. Most people aren't as worried about June futures because they believe that the demand for oil will return by then. But even crude prices for June are down 16%, down to about $21 per barrel, which is also a problem. And we're still a ways off. Those prices can still fluctuate quite a bit. But I have a different outlook. I kind of see this as one of the most momentous periods in our history, where I believe the transformation from a fossil fuel driven economy and industry will shift to more renewables and sustainable forms of energy, because I don't think this is going to be a one-time blip. It's not realistic to imagine that what's happening today will rise and fall and then we'll be past it. What's more likely is we'll have a second wave. Historically, a lot of the pandemics that we've faced have happened in waves. For example, the H1N1 flu outbreak in 2009 had their first wave in May and June and a second around October. With the Spanish flu pandemic in 1918, the first wave happened in the spring of 1918 and the second, more intense wave hit in the fall, followed by a third wave in the winter. And what we're seeing today, even if the shelter-in-place orders are lifted and we kind of go back to work and live our lives, is this might happen again. Some experts believe that this will have a second wave in August or September of 2020, but Dr. Fauci and others have said that we'll be better equipped to handle it then. We have more testing in place, we'll have better procedures of how to handle it, and I think we're going to be okay. But I do believe there might be a secondary wave where people are told or recommended to stay at home, to work from home, and to socially distance themselves. As a result, we'll be able to flatten the curve and get through this entirely. So what does that mean for the crude oil prices? Well, they're probably going to crash again, because if people aren't fully returning back to work, the prices aren't going to go up. And the second wave, when it does hit, is going to further suppress prices and cause problems. The really tricky part about this is oil companies, people who produce crude oil, can't really operate at lower levels. It's not very easy to say, you used to make 1,000 barrels a day, why not just make 100? That will be more in line with demand and you live your life. Because what happens is there's fixed costs that don't go down just because you're making less oil. A lot of the costs to run the rig and to maintain the operations, pay your employees and staff, those don't exactly decrease when you lower the production. So as a result, they can't be profitable at a certain level. You have to make so much oil per day to be profitable. And as a result, scaling down operations to a more sustainable level isn't a knob that they can really easily twist. This is going to be the biggest challenge going forward. Oil companies are huge multinational billion-dollar juggernauts. These are not small companies. And for them to operate, they have to have some stability in the market. And I don't think that there's going to be very much stability in the following year. So there is probably little cause for concern on their part. Now, if you own a gasoline car, you've probably seen gas prices cheaper than you've ever seen maybe in 20 years. But the long-term effect to the markets is harder to understand. If there's one thing that industries and markets don't like, it's uncertainty. And the future of oil in the coming year is anything but certain. The demand is going to be really unpredictable, but something else has happened too. For a lot of people around the world, working from home has become a thing that they've never done before. People have created home offices, learned how to have teleconferences and work from home, and suddenly, not having to commute, maybe your day is a little bit more productive. So as a result, even if we do go back to business as usual, I wouldn't be surprised if people work from home a couple days a week. If you're not feeling well, I think you go home and you don't come back for a week. So there's going to be long-term changes to us as a society that again is going to decrease the demand for oil. And then factor in the rise of the electric car, and that will be yet another nail in the coffin for big oil. With an EV, you just go in your garage and charge it at night every 5 or 6 days or whenever you need to. And if you're not using it, it just sits there. There isn't this huge pyramid of things that have to go right in order for your gasoline to be there. With an EV, it's the power grid. It's largely automated and it's already in place because we use it for everything else. We just have one source of power, whether it's for your house or your car, it all comes from one place. With gasoline, it's just not like that. But in the future, we could just have one highly controlled, easy to store and manage power source, which would be the grid. And that, I think, ultimately will be the final nail in the coffin. Oil has been a huge part of our industrialization in the last 100 years, but I can't help but feel that the times that we're in right now is just the start of a much larger trend. I don't believe that a lot of oil companies are going to be able to get through this, especially as demands have fallen and there's not really an easy way to understand how they'll recover. Big oil is a huge industry and nobody really thought they'd go down without a fight, but I don't think anybody could have predicted this. And it really is an unprecedented time right now. But I think this is the beginning of the end. Like all transitions, like all technologies, we as a people have always evolved. Whether it was landlines to cell phones or flip phones to smartphones, we've always evolved. Very few industries have lasted as long as big oil, but everybody has their time in the sun and eventually have to give way to the next big thing. And I can't help but feel that the next big thing is going to be electrified transportation, maybe hydrogen economies for larger things like shipping vessels. So as bad as that might be for the oil companies, there's going to be a whole new sector of energy. It'll be around sustainability, it'll be cleaner, it'll be better for us. The air has never been cleaner probably than it has right now because this great experiment that has left many people staying at home and not traveling and not commuting has shown us that a lot of cities are cleaner than ever, and burning fossil fuels is not really something we should strive to do. And this is one of those moments that is a watershed moment. It's not a small evolutionary scale, but a catastrophic moment where transitions and changes happen. So what do you guys think? Write to us in the comments and let us know. I'm dying to know your take on this. Is this temporary and a little blip on the radar? Is this a harbinger of more to come? I'd love to know. If you like this video, please consider sharing it on your social media accounts and everything else. And a special thank you to all of our patrons on Patreon. Your support has been incredible in these times of uncertainty for our channel. We really appreciate it. And if you want to be a rockstar supporter of this show, please consider joining us on Patreon. So that pretty much wraps it up for me. I'm Ricky, this is 2-Bit Da Vinci, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.